Somewhere in Zurich, in a bank vault most people will never see, there is money that doesn't officially exist. No name on the account, no paper trail, no owner, just numbers. Billions of dollars quietly sitting in the dark. That money was stolen from an entire country. And the man who stole it died in Hawaii in 1989, insisting until the very end that he had done nothing wrong. His name was Ferdinand Marcos. He was president of the Philippines for 20 years, and in that time, he stole between $5 and $10 billion. Approximately $3 billion has been recovered, the rest is still out there. But what should disturb you isn't how much he stole, it's how he did it. Because it wasn't a stroke of luck, it was a system. A system so sophisticated it is still being studied by dictators around the world today. The Philippines had just elected the most charismatic man they had ever seen. Marcos spoke of a reborn nation, a new society, a country that would take its place among the great nations of Asia. He presented himself as a war hero, medals, battlefield glory, one of the most decorated soldiers in Philippine history. The American military investigated those claims. They called them fabrications. Documents had been altered, records falsified. The medals, many of them, simply made up. But it didn't matter, because Marcos had something more powerful than the truth. He had a story. And in politics, a good story almost always wins. He won the presidency by the largest margin in the country's history. He was re-elected in 1969. And in 1972, he declared martial law. And the moment elections disappeared, the free press disappeared, and the opposition disappeared, the real work began. This is how you steal billions of dollars from a country of 50 million people. Slowly, systematically, and by making sure every piece of the machine has someone loyal to you controlling it. Government contracts first. If you wanted to build a road, a port, a government building, you went through people loyal to Marcos, and those people took their cut. A percentage here, a commission there. It added up fast. But this was just the beginning. Marcos built what investigators would later call a crony capitalism network. Entire monopolies handed to his allies in exchange for loyalty and a share of the profits. Sugar, coconuts, banking, construction, telecommunications. Sector after sector handed to people who squeezed it for everything it was worth. And whatever was left over went to Marcos. But the real money, the billions that would surface decades later in Swiss bank accounts, came from something far more sophisticated. The Philippine government received foreign aid, World Bank loans, international development funds. That money was meant for infrastructure, for hospitals, for schools. Instead, it moved through government accounts and then, quietly, through a series of transfers, into companies with names nobody recognized. Holding companies in Liechtenstein, foundations in Panama, accounts in Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, and above all, Switzerland. The Arelma Foundation, the Mahler Foundation, the Aguamina Corporation. Layer upon layer upon layer. Each one designed to make the trail disappear. The poverty rate in the Philippines was above 50%. The foreign debt was spiraling out of control. Marcos was taking emergency loans from the IMF to keep the economy afloat. And all the while the money kept moving, out of Manila, through the layers, into the dark. While Ferdinand built the machine, Imelda ran the spending operation. Imelda Romualdez Marcos was not a passive figure in this story. She was a co-architect of the regime's excess, a woman who turned spending stolen money into a form of performance art. Shopping trips to New York, Paris, Copenhagen, not weekend getaways, multi-week expeditions, entire floors of luxury hotels booked out. Designer boutiques closed to the public so she could browse in private. When investigators eventually got access to the presidential palace in 1986, what they found was staggering. Works by Michelangelo, Botticelli, and El Greco. 24-karat gold and diamond jewelry in quantities that filled crates. Manhattan properties purchased through shell companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And then there were the shoes, approximately 3,000 pairs. Some reports put the number closer to 7,700. Ferragamo, Chanel, Christian Dior. Shoes that had never been worn, purchased by the crate. Those shoes became a symbol, an image the world could hold on to, something that made the abstract number, billions of dollars stolen, suddenly viscerally real. Because if she bought that many shoes, what else did she buy? The answer, as investigators would spend decades discovering, was almost everything. And then 1983 arrived, and something happened that changed everything. Something Marcos could not control. August 21st, 1983, Manila International Airport. Benigno Aquino, the opposition leader who had spent years in prison before going into exile in the United States, decided to come home. His friends begged him not to go. He reportedly said that the Filipino is worth dying for. He was shot on the airport tarmac, in broad daylight, with dozens of witnesses, with television cameras rolling. The Marcos government blamed a lone gunman, who was himself immediately shot dead by soldiers on the same tarmac. Nobody in the international community believed it. That was the moment the Filipino people stopped being afraid. Millions took to the streets. The Catholic Church, led by Cardinal Sin, openly called for the end of the regime. The military began to fracture. Marcos called a snap election in February 1986. He thought he could win it. He was wrong. His opponent was Corazon Aquino, Benigno's widow. No political experience. An almost unshakable moral authority. The country rallied around her with an intensity Marcos could neither buy nor suppress. The election was stolen. Ballot boxes disappeared. Vote counts were falsified. And then the military broke completely. The people power revolution. Millions of Filipinos in the streets placing flowers in the barrels of military rifles, praying and singing and simply refusing to move. Marcos's tanks moved toward EDSA and stopped. The soldiers wouldn't fire on their own people. On February 25, 1986, Ferdinand Marcos boarded American military helicopters from the roof of Malacanang Palace. They took everything they could carry. Imelda, witnesses reported, brought 24 suitcases. Marcos died in Hawaii in 1989, insisting until the end that he had done nothing wrong. This is where the story becomes something darker than ordinary corruption. This is where it becomes an unsolved mystery. The new Philippine government created the Presidential Commission on Good Government. Its mandate was simple and enormous. Find the money. Everything Marcos had taken, bring it home. What they found was a labyrinth. Switzerland, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, the Cayman Islands, New York, London, Hong Kong. Investigators fought legal battles in courts across multiple continents for years. Some of it came back. The Swiss government eventually released approximately $684 million that had been frozen in Swiss bank accounts shortly after Marcos fled. The largest recovery of stolen state assets from Swiss banks in history at the time. But here is the number that matters. Marcos stole between $5 and $10 billion. The Philippines has recovered approximately $3 billion, which means somewhere between $2 and $7 billion is still out there. Hidden, untouched, earning interest in accounts investigators have not been able to fully penetrate, or converted into assets that don't look like money. Art, property, gold, diamonds, protected by layers of companies and foundations and trusts so complex that even the best forensic accountants in the world have hit dead ends. And now comes the part nobody expects. The part you should remember long after this video ends. In 2021, Imelda Marcos was found guilty of 7 counts of corruption for illegally channeling hundreds of millions of dollars into Swiss foundations during the martial law years. Sentenced to between 6 and 11 years in prison for each count. She has never served a single day. She is still alive, still in the Philippines, still insisting that everything was legal. And her son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known as Bongbong, was elected president of the Philippines in 2022 by one of the largest margins in the country's electoral history. The country his father looted voted his son into power. Let that sit for a moment. The story of Ferdinand Marcos is not just a story about corruption. It is a story about systems. Marcos didn't steal billions by being a criminal genius. He stole billions by being a president, by controlling the apparatus of a state, by understanding that the machinery of government, once captured, can be turned into the machinery of personal enrichment with startling efficiency. And he understood something else. That secrecy has a price, and that price is affordable if you have enough money. That there are banks willing to hold your money without asking questions. That there are lawyers willing to build the structures that protect it. That there are accountants willing to sign the documents. The international financial system, for all its rules and regulations, has always had a shadow version, a dark mirror, where the rules don't quite apply. The Marcos money is still out there, some of it at least, invisible, earning interest. But what should disturb you beyond what Marcos stole is that Marcos is not an anomaly. He is a template. His techniques, the shell companies, the Swiss accounts, the crony networks, the captured institutions, have been studied and replicated by dictators and kleptocrats on every continent. The names change, the countries change, the amounts change, the system does not change, because the system was never fixed. That is what remains hidden. Not just what Marcos stole, but what the existence of financial secrecy, the numbered accounts, the anonymous foundations, the offshore structures that exist for no legitimate purpose, makes possible. Every day, in countries you've heard of and in countries you haven't, billions are still missing, and the machine that hid them is still running.